In a courtroom packed with silence and power, one unexpected comment cut through the air, sharp, personal, and completely out of place. Eyes shifted. Tension rose. But just when it seemed like the moment would pass unchecked, the room froze. What followed wasn't rage, but something far more powerful. Within minutes, the balance of power flipped in a way no one saw coming. You won't believe who couldn't take the pressure and had to leave the room. Stay with this. In a courtroom, every word matters. It is a place where silence carries meaning and voices are expected to follow rules. Judges sit at the center of this system, and their words shape the direction of justice. Their role is not only to make decisions, but to set the tone for how legal conversations happen. Respect is not just expected, it is required from everyone, especially from those in power. When someone with that level of authority speaks in a way that crosses the line, it is more than just a comment. It becomes a statement that can change the energy of the entire room. During this particular court session, the room was calm and professional, as it usually is. Lawyers were present, papers were being reviewed, and arguments were being presented. It was the kind of environment where people choose their words carefully. That's when the unexpected happened. A high-ranking judge, known for controlling the courtroom with authority, made a remark that immediately stood out. It wasn't related to the legal argument being discussed. It wasn't needed for the case. Instead, it felt personal, pointed, and off-topic. It wasn't said with care. It was said with sharpness. The words came out quickly, but their impact spread slowly. It took a moment for people in the room to realize the weight of what was just said. The remark was not just a slip of the tongue, it was direct and dismissive. The way it was said made it clear that it was not about facts or law, it was about showing control. And even though the words were spoken in a courtroom, where arguments are common, this was different. It wasn't part of any debate. It felt like an attack, the kind that doesn't need shouting to be strong, the kind that cuts through the air with quiet force. People around the room began to react without speaking. Body language changed. Some lowered their heads. Some raised their eyebrows. A few exchanged silent glances. No one said a word, but the room had changed. The atmosphere that was once steady and respectful now felt tense and uncomfortable. The insult was not just heard, it was felt. And the one who said it didn't seem to notice or maybe didn't care. That's the thing about power. Sometimes, when people have held it too long, they stop checking how they use it. The moment brought out something important about how power works in formal spaces like courtrooms. A judge is given trust, not just authority. With that trust comes the duty to be fair, balanced, and above personal feelings. But here, something different happened. Instead of using words to guide the discussion, the judge used them to belittle someone. This made the space feel less like a court and more like a place where power could be used carelessly. It was a shift from order to imbalance. In legal settings, tone and language carry extra meaning. Judges are expected to remain neutral, especially in difficult moments. They are not supposed to use their position to shame, mock, or dominate. The justice system relies on fairness, and that fairness begins with the person at the highest seat. When that person speaks out of line, it doesn't just affect one individual. It challenges the whole idea of what the courtroom stands for. What made this moment so striking was that it came without warning. There was no argument, no back and forth, no sign of conflict. Just one sudden comment, sharp, cold, and dismissive. The kind that leaves a mark, the kind that reminds people that sometimes those who should speak with balance can fall into bias. And when that happens, the silence afterward says more than the words ever could. This was not just about one sentence. It was about how that sentence was delivered, when it was delivered, and who it came from. It was about watching someone with authority choose to break from professionalism, even for a moment. And in that moment, the entire courtroom witnessed how damaging a single insult can be, especially when spoken by someone who holds power over others. The words faded, but the discomfort remained. It was a reminder that even in rooms built for justice, power must still be checked and respect must be given freely, not only asked for. In a courtroom setting, every word carries a purpose. Judges, lawyers, and everyone involved are expected to speak with care and stay focused on the legal matters at hand. It is a place where emotions are managed, facts are valued, and personal opinions are kept out of the discussion. That is the standard. But sometimes the rules are not followed by the very people who are supposed to enforce them. In one particular case, the courtroom took an unexpected turn when a comment was made that clearly did not belong in the legal conversation. It was not about the case, it was not about evidence, it was aimed at a person. The remark did not include a name. It was not direct in a technical sense. But the meaning behind it was clear. Everyone present understood exactly who it was meant for. The tone used, the timing of the comment, and the way it was delivered left no doubt. It was personal. It was targeted. And it was made in a setting where such behavior should never happen. This kind of remark doesn't need to include a name to be understood. Words can carry identity without being specific, especially when they are loaded with attitude or spoken with a look that says more than the sentence itself. What made the situation worse was that it came out of nowhere. There was no argument going on. There was no reason to step away from the issue being discussed. The room had been calm, even if the subject was serious. That's what made the shift so sharp. It wasn't just what was said, but how far off topic it was. This wasn't about law anymore. It was about ego. It was about sending a message to someone in the room, using power instead of reason. This moment revealed something important about how communication can be used to exclude or attack, even without raising one's voice. In the courtroom, where structure and fairness should guide every word, a comment like this does more than just offend. It disrupts. It tells everyone in the room that there is now a different kind of game being played, one that's not about the truth, but about putting someone down. It shows that the person speaking is willing to shift attention away from justice and turn it into something personal. People in the courtroom noticed the change instantly. It wasn't just the one being spoken to who felt it. Others around the room shifted in their seats. Some looked away. Some looked directly at the person who was clearly the subject of the insult. The silence that followed was louder than the comment itself. No one had to ask who the words were for. It was obvious. That's how targeted language works. It leaves no space for confusion, even when names are left out. The way this kind of behavior affects a courtroom is deep. When someone in power uses words to attack someone else, even in a subtle way, it changes the balance of the space. A courtroom is supposed to be equal ground. Every voice should be heard fairly. But when one voice uses its position to throw shade, it makes others smaller. It turns attention away from the facts and toward emotions. And in doing so, it breaks the very rules that justice is built on. It's also worth noting that the comment didn't come in response to anything wrong. There was no reason for it. That's what made it even more unfair. The target had done nothing to invite that kind of treatment. There was no disrespect shown, no rule broken. The words came anyway, like a test, or maybe a warning. And the fact that the speaker chose to make that statement in public, on record, shows just how casual some people can be with their authority. In these moments, the idea of equal treatment under the law becomes fragile. If someone can be insulted in a courtroom without provocation, what does that say about the space being safe for truth and fairness? When words are used to push someone aside or make them feel small, the whole room feels the weight of that injustice. The insult may be spoken to one person, but its effect is much wider. It touches everyone watching. It makes people question the values that are supposed to guide the legal system. This moment reminded everyone that real respect in the courtroom isn't just about following rules. It's about understanding the impact of words, especially when they're used by someone whose job is to lead with integrity. When those words are used to single someone out, even indirectly, the harm runs deeper than it seems. And once that damage is done, it can't be taken back. The courtroom may return to silence, but the meaning of what happened stays with everyone who witnessed it. When someone is spoken to in a disrespectful way, especially in a serious place like a courtroom, the first reaction many expect is either silence or anger. But there are other ways to respond. Ways that don't involve raising a voice or showing frustration. In this particular moment, the person who had just been insulted did not shrink back or lose control. Instead, they responded with a calm and steady presence. They used their voice not to attack, but to bring clarity, strength, and truth into the room. It wasn't a reaction driven by emotion. It was a response shaped by intelligence and self-respect. This kind of reply is powerful in a way that shouting could never be. It doesn't try to overpower the room. It invites the room to think. It calls attention not just to the words that were spoken earlier, but to the deeper problem behind them. When someone is wrongly spoken to, the easiest path is to give the same energy back. But choosing to respond with dignity takes a different kind of courage. It's the kind of response that teaches a lesson just by being different. And that's exactly what happened in that courtroom. The person who had been indirectly targeted did not change their tone. There was no shift in attitude. What changed instead was the meaning in the room. The words they spoke were not emotional, but they carried weight. They pointed out truth, not just legal truth, but human truth. They reminded everyone that respect isn't optional. It's necessary, even in disagreement. They didn't need to say that they were hurt. They didn't need to call out the insult. Their reply made it clear that they understood what had happened, and that they were choosing a higher path in response. This moment became a lesson for everyone watching. It showed that real strength is not always about how loud you speak, but about what you choose to say when others expect you to fall silent. It reminded the room that even when you're being treated unfairly, you still have control over your voice, your values, and your response. This response didn't just protect the speaker's dignity, it shifted the entire atmosphere in the courtroom. People in the room felt the change. They saw someone being put down, then watched that same person rise in the way they carried themselves. It was not pride, it was not arrogance, it was quiet confidence, earned, not shown off. That kind of confidence doesn't come from titles or position. It comes from knowing who you are, even when others try to define you differently. And that was exactly the kind of energy that filled the room during that moment. The message that came through was simple but strong. No one gets to control your worth with a comment. No one has the power to take your voice unless you give it to them. And when someone tries to insult you in public, one of the most powerful things you can do is respond with truth, not anger. That kind of response leaves an impression that is deeper and longer lasting than any argument. This reply didn't just push back against a comment. It reset the tone of the courtroom. It reminded everyone that the law is not only about rules and decisions, it's about how people are treated in the process. It asked the room, without using those exact words, to consider whether the space still felt fair, respectful, and just. It showed that even when power is misused, there is still room for truth to speak back, and to speak clearly. The power of that moment came from the contrast. One person had used words to lower the tone of the room. The other used words to lift it. One had tried to make someone feel small. The other made everyone around think bigger. That's what happens when someone responds with purpose instead of pride. It doesn't just protect their own character. It challenges others to reflect on theirs. There was no need for long speeches or dramatic expressions. The strength of the response was in its simplicity. It reminded the courtroom that grace under pressure is one of the clearest signs of leadership. And when truth is spoken in a calm voice, it often echoes louder than anything else. In many courtroom situations, events unfold in a steady, careful way. People speak in turns, present evidence, and wait for decisions. The environment is built to stay calm, even when the topics are serious. But sometimes something happens that changes everything very quickly. A single moment, a short comment, or a simple response can shift the energy in the room in a matter of minutes. What starts as a quiet session can turn into a tense and unforgettable scene almost instantly. That is exactly what took place during this specific court session. After an unnecessary and disrespectful remark was made, things began to change, not in hours, but in minutes. At first there was silence. A few people may have looked down, others glanced around. The courtroom, usually filled with quiet focus, now felt thick with discomfort. No one had to speak for the tension to grow. It was visible in the way people sat, the way they held their breath, and the way they waited for what would come next. Then came the response. Calm, controlled, and full of meaning. It did not match the disrespect that came before it. It did not try to match the tone of the insult. Instead, it stood on its own, clear, measured, and rooted in truth. This is where the shift truly began. Within just a few sentences, the atmosphere went from awkward silence to deep attention. Every person in that courtroom began listening more closely. The words spoken were not loud, but they carried something heavier than volume. They carried clarity and purpose. The energy in the room shifted quickly, and the reason was simple. People recognized something real. In places of power, moments of honesty can shine even brighter because they are rare. When someone answers disrespect with grace, it breaks expectations. Most people expect anger, frustration, or silence. They don't expect strength that comes without raising a voice. And when they hear it, they pause, they watch, they feel it. That's what happened in that courtroom. In only a few minutes, the person who had been indirectly insulted had taken control of the moment, not with force, but with presence. Others, in the courtroom, began reacting, not out loud, but through body language and focus. Some sat up straighter, others nodded slightly. Even those who might not have spoken a word seemed to understand the weight of what was happening. A respectful response had turned the spotlight. Now, the one who had made the original comment no longer had control of the room. That control had quietly moved to the one who had just spoken, the one who responded with truth and balance. It's important to understand how quickly this change took place. What started as a routine court session became something else entirely. Within minutes, the tone had changed. Power had shifted, and not because of anger, but because of reason. That kind of shift doesn't take hours of debate. It takes one voice standing firm in the middle of unfairness. It takes someone refusing to bend under pressure even when they have every reason to. In legal spaces, timing matters. People often think change comes slowly, but sometimes it happens fast, when someone says the right thing at the right moment. In this case, that moment came just minutes after the insult. The person who had been looked down on was now the one being looked up to, not because they demanded it, but because they earned it with how they carried themselves. The respect in the room had moved in a new direction. The most surprising part was how the original speaker, the one who made the dismissive remark, responded to this shift. The reaction was not one of strength, but of discomfort. The same person who had just tried to control the room with their words now seemed shaken. What had started as a confident moment for them had become a moment of retreat. That change didn't take long. It didn't need a dramatic buildup. It happened in a matter of minutes, one person misusing their words, and another using theirs to bring the room back to balance. This change showed how quickly the energy in a room can be transformed, especially in serious places like courtrooms. People expect order, fairness, and respect. When one of those things is broken, the reaction can be quiet but fast. In this case, the shift from disrespect to dignity happened not over the course of a long trial, but in a short moment that no one expected. It was a reminder that real authority is not always in the loudest voice. Sometimes it's in the calm reply that changes everything, quickly and completely. Sometimes a courtroom can feel like a place where power sits heavily on one side. The judge's seat is higher, the tone is formal, and the structure is made to show who holds authority. Most people enter such a space with quiet respect, knowing that they are being watched, measured, and possibly judged. But power, no matter how official it may seem, is not beyond challenge, especially when it is misused. In one courtroom moment, the balance of that power was tested, and what followed surprised almost everyone. It started with a comment, one that didn't belong in a professional setting. It wasn't about the case, the facts, or the law. It was personal, unnecessary, and carried the kind of tone that tries to push someone down without saying it outright. The comment wasn't shouted. It wasn't long. But it was enough to show that someone was using their position to make a statement not based on justice, but on ego. The room felt it instantly. You could sense it in the stillness that followed. Most people might expect the person being targeted to stay quiet or respond softly given the environment. But what happened next turned the courtroom into something very different. The response was not loud, but it was strong. It wasn't defensive, but it was clear. It came with facts, with confidence, and with a level of calm that silenced everything else. The focus of the entire room shifted. No one was looking toward the high seat anymore. All attention turned to the one who had just spoken, not because they raised their voice, but because their voice carried truth. Within moments, something rare happened. The person who had started with power, the one who had spoken first, expecting no response, began to lose control of the room. Their body language changed. The once straight posture turned uncertain. There was no longer eye contact. Instead of guiding the moment, they now seemed to want it to end. It was visible. The way their hands moved, the way they glanced away, the way they shifted in their seat, and then, most clearly, the way they left. This wasn't just walking out of a room. It was walking away from a moment they no longer controlled. A few minutes earlier, they had spoken with complete confidence, sure that their words would stand unchallenged. But the response had flipped the energy. What was meant to silence someone ended up exposing a deeper weakness, the fear of being truly seen and heard by someone who stands strong, even without official power. There is something deeply educational about this moment. It teaches that real power is not in the seat you sit in, but in the strength of your words and actions. When someone can speak calmly after being insulted, and do so in a way that commands attention, they become the true leader in the room. They shift power with presence, and when that happens, those who misuse authority often can't handle the change. They are used to being listened to, not being answered back with dignity. They expect silence, not strength. The walkout was not a planned event. It wasn't part of a legal decision. It was a reaction, one caused not by disrespect but by the shock of facing someone who refused to be small. The one who left the courtroom wasn't being pushed out by rules or protest. They were being pushed out by truth. That's the kind of exit that carries more weight than any official ruling. It shows that power based only on position is fragile. It falls apart quickly when met with confidence that doesn't come from a title. As the door closed behind them, the room stayed quiet, not because of fear, but because of respect. People had just witnessed something rare. They saw that even in places designed to favor one side of the room, the balance can be reset. All it takes is one voice willing to speak clearly, with purpose, even when the odds seem high. And when the one who started with power walks out trembling, it's a lesson for everyone. Respect cannot be demanded through force. It must be earned through behavior. What stayed with the people in that room wasn't just the words that were spoken, or even the comment that started it all. It was the shift. The clear, visible, undeniable shift from power held by a title to power held by presence. And the moment when the one who first seemed untouchable left, no longer in control, marked that shift perfectly.